Thank you, friend. Shabbat Shalom. Love is all, love is you. Live it, be it, share it. Imagine there's no countries it isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Don't we all really want this? And perhaps instead of no religion too, think of one religion too. I don't know that the world is ready for no religion. We like to believe in something. My apologies go to everyone for having the last few audio parshas sent out without the attachments. A lesson in hurrying and not checking. I will certainly try my best to ensure it doesn't happen anymore. Now, one of my great mentors sent me an article he had received with an interview with a famous writer. And the famous writer said he felt that the ultimate evil in the world now was not war, but aggression. And I certainly agree that aggression is far more evil. But I wonder if I wouldn't instead suggest the ultimate evil is actually ignorance. And while I would have originally said stupidity, I think ignorance is a fairer descriptive. Let's work together, friends, to fight ignorance, the petri dish or breeding ground for aggression, intolerance, and hatred. Just like little girls and boys playing with their little toys, seems like all they really were doing was waiting for love. And thank you, Nanette, for those kind words you sent. I'm so glad you get something from these weekly shows. The feedback I get from you all helps me tremendously in planning and preparing. And Ethel really enjoyed hearing the dogs add their 2 cents last week. I love when they pipe in. Everybody should be entitled to their opinion. And Bob, I hope you are doing well in getting your dancing shoes ready. The harvest moon is calling, and you're only a month away from your son Noah's wedding. And I don't know if Noah ever hears or sees the show, but his wedding parsha is a fabulous one. It will be Ki Tavo, when you'll come. And it is the parsha that presents probably the first actual liturgy in the Torah. All the best, Noah, and continue to get well, Bob. And friends, please take a minute at the end of this show to say goodbye to Robin Williams. Alav Hashalom, may he rest in peace. A man who only brought joy and poignancy to millions of people and who will be sorely missed. A month or so ago, and I hate to say I can't remember if I mentioned it or not, but I can't remember. I had watched The Angriest Man in Brooklyn, and it was a fantastic film about taking stock of what's important. I thought Robin Williams was amazing in it. And I thought it captured how so many people can be. We never know when our time is up, friends. Think about what's really important to you. All my little plans and schemes lost like some forgotten dreams. Seems that all I really was doing was waiting for you. You know, friends, there's an old saying, small things amuse small minds. And I got to tell you, I get amused by the smallest of things. But I like to think my mind isn't necessarily that small. However, what seems to have happened is that the more advanced mankind seems to think it gets, the smaller his mind becomes and the bigger his ego gets. I am certainly endeavoring to expand my mind and shrink my ego. And so this week, friends, we explore ekev, because the world is round, it turns me on. Because the wind is high, it blows my mind. Ekev, Yaakov. This is the Jacob section of Deuteronomy because Ekev really means heel. And we all know that Jacob was born grabbing the heel of his brother Esau. And in this parsha, because means on the heel of, or because of, and relates to the myriad of rewards promised to Israel on the heel of keeping God's covenant. Historically, this book does not seem to fit. It appears to be written for 7th or 6th century BCE peoples. It talks of cultic purity as it emphasizes the separation of Canaanite from Israelite and forbids intermarriage. And the oft-repeated law of one rule for everyone and God being everyone's God takes a back seat to this being a select group's God, as the people are told not to fear the numerous peoples they are surrounded by. Last week we saw a strong Moses-Joseph connection, but now, for this audience, we have a different connection drawn, with the rhythm of a strong Moses-Josiah connection. And friends, Josiah would have been the king around the 7th century BCE, as the Torah at the end of Moses' life in Deuteronomy 34:10 says, "And a prophet did not rise again in Israel like Moses," while the Tanakh at the end of Josiah's life in 2 Kings 23 says, "And after him one did not rise like him." The parallel would not have been lost on the people. Many believe this book was written subsequent to the first Babylonian exile. Friends, the most important thing for an exiled people to hold on to would be their religion. And yet over time most conquered nations do become assimilated. The Jews in exile did not. Their religion was different enough from their conquerors. Most pagan religions have the same gods with different names. But the wind god is still the wind god, whatever he or she is called. The Jewish God was different and had no equal, and so the extreme monotheism of Deuteronomy was designed as a religious text and made it easy to cull future liturgy from this book more than the others. As a result, from this book, as we talked about, we get the Shema, the single most important prayer in Judaism, the Amidah, the standing prayer said at every service, and from this Parsha this week, the Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals. It comes from Moses telling the people that you'll eat and be full and bless Adonai your God. And we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls that this prayer goes back at least as far as the late Second Temple period. And friends, remember, most blessings are of rabbinical origin and not from the Torah. The exceptions are the grace after meals and the blessing before learning Torah. One for physical sustenance and one for spiritual sustenance. And even with some of the confusing things we are told, we're given some very important reasons as to why certain events took place. In Deuteronomy 8:2 it says, "And you shall remember all the way that Adonai your God had you go these 40 years in the wilderness in order to degrade you, to test you, to know what was in your heart." There you have it, friends. The reasons for the wilderness generations. It's all summed up in one short sentence, and for the first time, Moses reveals the test of the people. This is an extremely powerful sequence because of how these words were used before and what they stood for. Exodus tells us that the Egyptians degraded the Israelites, and it is what Shechem did to Dinah. And what the people are to do on Yom Kippur, it is to humble, to bring down, to lower someone. We grow up thinking of the fasting and not the degrading. So when you talk of the holy days in your personal preparation, as I'm sure you all do, don't just do it by rote. Explain that it's not just about not eating. The second word, test, is what God did to Abraham when commanding the sacrifice of Isaac in Genesis, with the result of the test being that God now knows that you fear God. And this third word of know is to establish what's in a person's heart. And the opening of the heart shall have even greater relevance later in the section. All these words, my friends, will remind the people of the stories and events that came before. And the big reminder is about God's promise to Abraham. That was the beginning. And the word used is take possession. And it appears more than 60 times throughout Deuteronomy, linked directly to the promise to the patriarchs. And we are taken back to Abraham's complaint that he is childless, so someone else will take possession of what is his. But God reassures him that his own offspring will take possession. And friends, it's hard to imagine not wanting your own offspring to succeed you, to do better, to be better, to have more. There are some parents who can be like that, but the norm is for the desire to have your descendants be better off. And what does Moses do? He tells the people it's not by their virtue that they are going to take possession of the land. No, it's because of God's promise to the patriarchs. Moses actually reminds them that, in fact, they were not virtuous. They complained and rebelled, and Israel is not intrinsically better than anyone. They are special because they've been given the singular opportunity to follow a specific path that will ultimately bring blessings to the families of earth, all the earth. Friends, we are presented with a parsha focused on the blessings and rewards promised for obedience, and which talks about the second set of tablets containing the Asheret Hadibarim, the 10 things. Doesn't quite sound the same, does it? Which God provided after Moses destroyed the first set. And again, Moses continues bringing past into present as he talks to the audience as if they were the ones who had undergone the trials of the wilderness, allowing everyone reading it from that time forward to see themselves in the same position. And we find out Moses stayed on the mountain without food and water for 40 days and 40 nights each time. this becomes a fascinating reflection to the people's behavior because the rebellions that occurred in the wilderness were all over food and water. But friends, the deeper lesson is God provided life sustenance. After all, Moses went without either. We also learn more about the molten calf and Aaron's role, and the time frames continued to shift as events 40 years in the past become events in the current retelling of the story. Another interesting difference occurs in Deuteronomy 10:1, when Moses says he built the ark, with no mention of Bezalel, which led Rashi and others to speculate that perhaps there were two arks. Friends, last week we saw Moses warn the people, hear the statutes and the laws I'm about to teach you. You shall not add to the word that I charge you, and you shall not subtract from it, to keep the commands of the Lord your God. And we knew this was a warning about adding too much to the Torah. The same holds true of commentary, and there can be a view held of some of the biblical commentators like Rashi that reject questioning what they wrote, elevating them to a status that I'm sure they would have rejected. Friends, continue to admire the great commentators of the past while encouraging new ones, but distinguish between what the Torah says and what commentators say. The goal of learning from the Torah in each new age is never ending, and all commentaries must be subject to criticism and improvement. And as there was a significant shift in the fourth commandment of Sabbath between Exodus and Deuteronomy, a significant change in the covenant of Abraham now takes place. In Deuteronomy 10:16 it says, "And you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart. For the Lord your God is the God of gods, Master of masters, who shows no favor and takes no bribe, doing justice for orphan and widow, and loving the sojourner, and you shall love the sojourner." Friends, the covenant has changed. The most commonly observed commandment by the Jewish nation for centuries has been circumcision. But here we are commanded to circumcise our hearts. And the metaphorical application of circumcision to the organ of understanding and feeling is a beautiful reinterpretation of the meaning of circumcision, providing for an opening to the responsiveness of God's words. And while the physical was applicable to men only, this, my friends, the opening of the soul, is applicable to both men and women. And the groups most susceptible to exploitation and abuse are never to be forgotten: the orphans, the widows, and the wandering strangers. And if this were Deuteronomy the musical, as he assembled masses stood at the Jordan ready to cross, you would practically be able to hear Moses singing, "I'll remember you at the end of the trail. I had so much left to do. I had so little time to fail." There's some people that you don't forget, even though you've only seen them one time or two. When the roses fade and I'm in the shade, I'll remember you. You know, friends, this parsha emphasizes your ability to give thanks. I was watching one of the small-minded, idiotic comedy shows I love so much the other day. And a couple was talking, and one of them said they'd had lousy parents, they became lousy parents, and now they had lousy kids. And you know, I actually hear that from many people. You can't necessarily change the lousy parents you had, but you can change the parents you became, and therefore change your kids. Friends, we have so many blessings in our lives. Recognize them and change you to change the world. Bless you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for writing. Thank you for watching, for listening. Rachel and Daniel, I'll see you at your Simcha Saturday. Love, health, and peace be with you all. Because the sky is blue, it makes me cry. Love is all, love is new, love is all, love is you. And goodbye, Robin Williams. Hail and farewell. There is a genie waiting for each of us, and no, ain't never had a friend like you. Shabbat Shalom.